So we saw David in this last, in his psalm of deliverance, talking about how God delivers those who take refuge in him. And, that's kind of a contrast that we see. If you read through the Psalms and you go through, you find several Psalms where David's actually talking. He says, hey, how come God, why are the wicked prospering? Look at me. I'm trying to do your will. I'm hiding in a cave. I'm running from Saul. He's trying to kill me. Why are the wicked prospering? And so we see that, he had gone through those times when he saw, it doesn't seem like this is panning out. But here we see when he's looking back at his life and he's looking back at all that happened, he says, hey, you know what? The Lord does plead the case. He does take action. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Even though we don't see it at the immediate time we would like to see it. God had a plan for David, and if we learn how to live under authority, like David did under Saul's authority, then we will know how to be in authority and know how to treat other people. And so David went through that process. So we get to the end of 2 Samuel, and when we're there, there's a last thing that's given to us in 2 Samuel. Is not the greatest thing. David takes the census. And it says here to start in 2 Samuel 24, now again the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and it incited David against them to say, go number Israel and Judah. This is a somewhat controversial passage in that there's another account of this in 1 Chronicles, and here it says the anger of the Lord incited David. But if we look in 1 Chronicles 21, I'm just going to bring this up because it's something I can't answer. It says, 1 Chronicles 21:1, then Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel. Well, here in 2 Samuel it says the anger of the Lord incited David. Here it says Satan did. It says, well, what do you do with that? It's almost like probably the best example we have in the Bible would be in the story of Job. We see two different pictures there. Job is saying, God is inflicting me, and when we see the heavenly picture, we see Satan is executing actually the affliction upon Job. And it's almost like that's kind of what we're having here is the earthly view and the heavenly view. From man's point of view, since God is over all things, we just think anything that's going on is what he's kind of quote unquote doing to us. But as we look like in the story of Job, it wasn't God inflicting and bringing the harm upon Job, it was Satan. God, under God's allowing it, but it was Satan actually executing that judgment. And so we kind of see that in this story of 2 Samuel. It says that the anger of the Lord incited David against Israel, so go number Israel and Judah. But it's interesting that what happens here is that when David does it, a pestilence, judgment has to come upon the nation. And people say, well, why does that have to happen? Well, David didn't follow God's instruction. And God's instruction is seen as in Exodus chapter 30. David knew the Lord, and I'm sure he knew the law, and he was accountable for this, and he was acting, in his own whatever initiative. It was all on his own initiative. And Exodus chapter 30, verse 12 says, when you take a census of the sons of Israel to number them, then each one of them shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord when you number them, that there may be no plague among them when you number them. Here was instruction that they were to give, it says even in verse 13, this is what everyone who is numbered shall give, half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs. I don't know what that is either. Half a shekel as a contribution to the Lord. But so anyway, there was a offering that was supposed to be made when the sons of Israel were numbered. And David just wanted to know. He just, forget all of that. I'm going to do this my way. Just go number. And in verse 2, it says, the king said to Joab, and this is chapter 24 of 2 Samuel, commander of the army who was with him, go about now through all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba and register the people that I may know the number of the people. Once again, what does it mean? He says from Dan to Beersheba? That's just basically saying from the north to the south, every area of Israel, all of Israel. But Joab said to the king, now may the Lord your God add to the people 100 times as many as they are, while the eyes of the Lord, the king still see. But why does my Lord the king delight in this thing? Joab's trying to stop him. he knows this isn't the right thing to do. You know, you've got a great army. You've got a great army. May you have even more. But don't do this numbering thing out of your pride or anger or whatever you're doing it out of here. He says, stop, because it's not according to God's desire, his will. And so David is actually, in verse 11, when David arose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, go and speak to David. Thus the Lord says, I am offering you 3 things. Choose for yourself one of them, which I may do to you. So Gad came to David and told him and said to him, shall 7 years of famine come to you in your land? Or will you flee 3 months before your foes while they pursue you? Or shall there be 3 days pestilence in your land? Now consider and see what answer I shall return to him who sent me. So Gad comes to David and with the word of the Lord and says, you're going to have to pay for this, David. You know, David was pretty, what would you call it? Spontaneous. What do you call it when anyway, he just reacted out of just whatever feelings. Sometimes it seems like he just didn't think everything through very well, and now he went against the directive of God in the law that God had given him, and there's going to be consequences. So in verse 15, it says, so the Lord sent a pestilence among Israel, because that's what David chose. Because he said, I'll fall into the mercies of the Lord. I don't want to be put into the hands of my enemies. You know, and the other thing, 7 years, that sounded a famine. That doesn't sound good. And 70,000 men of the people from Dan to Beersheba died, it says in verse 15. You know, 70,000 people are suddenly dead because you got a little bit anxious to know how big a big shot you were, how many you had in your army. The angel stretched out his hand, verse 16, toward Israel to destroy it, and the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who destroyed the people, it is enough. Now relax your hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Then, verse 17, then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking down the people and said, behold, it is I who have sinned, and it is I who have done wrong. But these sheep, what have they done? Please let thy hand be against me and against my father's house. So David once again steps in as the intercessor. Now he created the problem, but he does try to step in to, say, Lord, it's not them. They didn't do this. Now that's a little bit, I don't know if that's totally accurate, because it says in verse 1, now the anger of the Lord burned against Israel. He was angry with Israel for some reason and incited David to do this. But from David's eyes, once again, he steps in and he takes the place of intercession. He comes in to say, it's me. It's me. I'm the one that's brought about this consequence. So the last thing we see from David in 2 Samuel, verse 25, it says, David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offering and peace offerings. Thus the Lord was moved by entreaty for the land, and the plague was held back from Israel. So David did intercede. He made sacrifice in this case, as you read those last 8 verses or so of 2 Samuel. And the Lord relents of the plague and brings that off. So we end 2 Samuel with that. Not the best of pictures. If you look at 1 Chronicles, you get some more history of David, a little different view. That's where he mentions Hushai the Archite is in his court as a friend. It also, in their 1 Chronicles, you'll see that the whole story about Bathsheba is left out. So we don't see that in 1 Chronicles, we see it in 2 Samuel. So there's a little bit difference there. As we move into 1 Kings, what we're moving into is just like when we moved into 2 Samuel, it was the death of Saul. Now we're moving into 1 Kings. Early on in 1 Kings in chapter 2 is the death of David. In chapter 1, he's very ill. There's a thing that happens, and David has one last big thing that he does in the commitment to God's seed reigning on his throne. He determines who it is who will follow him on the reign as king in Israel.